Wonderful. Richard is running a few minutes late, so bearing in mind we've already got the rest of the panel, I thought we'd kick off and Richard can sneak in when he's here. Dan, his researcher at the back, will give me a little signal. Thanks so much for coming. The fact that you've made it to Tuesday and at 9:30 in the morning is a testament to the wonderful panellists we have and hopefully what will be a brilliant discussion. So for those of you who don't know, my name's Lynsey. I am the Senior Climate Programme Manager at the Conservative Environment Network. And if you've made it to Tuesday and you haven't heard this spiel already, it's coming again. The Conservative Environment Network is the independent forum for conservatives in the UK and around the world who support net zero, nature restoration and resource security. Today we are kicking off with a panel on sustainable aviation. Is net zero flight ready for takeoff, or will the green agenda clip aviation's wings? Aviation and flying is one of the most carbon intensive activities we do, but it also enables trade and allows us to explore new cultures and countries. Should people pay more if they fly more to reduce the environmental impact? Do we need to restrict flying to save the planet, or can UK manufactured technology propel us to net zero? Hopefully we're going to answer some of these questions and a lot more from all of you lovely audience. We have got some amazing speakers with us here today. So I'm going to give a brief introduction and then we will have some questions from the audience. So we have Baroness Vere, Minister for Aviation at the Department for Transport. Thank you very much for being here. We will have Richard Graham, MP for Gloucester. And I also found out yesterday that he was previously an airline manager. So there you go. Ros Bullard, Director of Research at Green Alliance, who has kindly stood in for Helena, also of Green Alliance. So thank you very much for being here, Ros. Graham Simpson, MSP representing the Central Scotland region, and he is the Shadow Minister for Net Zero, Energy and Transport. And finally, Matt Gorman, Chair of Sustainable Aviation, and a big thank you to Sustainable Aviation for supporting this event. So thank you very much. So as I said, we'll start off with a few opening remarks. We'll try and keep them to around 3 minutes each, if that's possible, so that we can try and take as many questions from the audience as possible. And I'm going to kick off with Baroness Vere. Over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And well done, everybody, for making it here. It was a bit of a struggle, but never mind. We're here and we're going to be talking about a very, very important topic this morning. So, look, from my perspective, I've been Aviation Minister for about a year. I previously did the job about 4 years ago. In those 4 years, the improvements and the changes in the way that we're thinking about net zero for aviation is just enormous, absolutely massive. So we've had the Jet Zero strategy, which was published in July 2022. We did a 1 year on in 2023. And of course, you will all know there's a huge amount going on within the different interventions that we're planning. There are two big elements to getting to net zero for aviation. One intervention is SAF and the second intervention is hydrogen, and both are going to be needed. When it comes to SAF, we have said that we will have a SAF mandate of 10%. This is quite unusual, particularly within the energy sphere. And because of that, people will sometimes say, oh, but we need a contract for difference as well. Well, that ain't going to happen, because you've got the demand pulling things through. So what will happen instead is there will be some sort of revenue certainty mechanism, which of course we will have to consult on and work on over the coming months, because, trust me, it's really complicated. And when it comes to hydrogen, there are an enormous numbers of technologies that we can bring forward. Hydrogen fuel cell for smaller aircraft, hydrogen combustion for the big ones. But again, that relies on an enormous amount of technological development. Actually, technological development is going to be key to decarbonisation as a whole. And some of you will have heard me say this yesterday, but it bears repeating. So what happened on the 16th of October, 1908? That was the first powered flight. Well done. In the UK, about 4 years after Kitty Hawk in the US. And the plane was built at the Army Balloon Factory in Farnborough. We didn't even have an aircraft factory in those days. And then what happened on the 5th of March, 1936, was the day that the Spitfire first flew. Now that gap is 28 years. Between now and 2050, for us, for net zero, the gap is 27 years. If we think about the sorts of technology changes that happened when we were first getting off the ground to where we got to a plane, the Spitfire, where over 20,000 of them were made over the course of the war. So I'm very hopeful that technology can get us there, and it's up to government to make sure that we have the regulation in place, that we're providing the ambition, and that we're providing the certainty, and that is what I'm intending to do.
Wonderful. Ros, I'll come to you next. What do you think about the kind of scale of the challenge with the aviation sector? Have some of the solutions that the ministers talk about, do you think that they're adequate? Do you think they're enough?
I think if they come into being, yes. I mean, that would be, there are some really exciting technologies out there. I think for us, the challenge is that we really need some confidence they're actually going to be delivered and to schedule, and the policies that brings zero emission aviation aircraft to scale. I think we see a little bit of a kind of gap there, and we'd like to see a little bit more certainty. Across aviation as a whole, I mean, it is transport as a whole is one of those sectors where emissions aren't falling as rapidly as they could be. We do a policy tracker at Green Lights every sort of 6 months or so, and in every part of the transport bit there are some gaps. And even though it's looking particularly around 2030, which isn't when you'd expect aviation emissions to fall substantially, there are already gaps due to aviation not falling quite as quickly as we'd like. And we're also concerned about international aviation and shipping's inclusion in the sixth carbon budget, which would help incentivise and kind of provide a backstop in this area. That the legislation to make sure that it is part of the carbon budget hasn't actually entered law yet. So I think we're a little bit worried about that legislative framework as well as the technology. And keen to see SAFs, but do have some questions there as well, particularly around the availability of feedstocks and competition for land. If all of the feedstock came from biomass, that would use up a third of the sustainable biomass available in 2030, and we also need land for plenty of other things. Likewise, renewable electricity for making green hydrogen. There's a lot of other demands as well, and then there's the cost of that and where that falls. So I think there's a fair number of things to be worked out, and I know it's really unpopular to talk about demand, but I think from our point of view, this is where that conversation about demand starts to come in. That we see a lot of justification for the CCC's argument that you should wait until the mid-2030s and be sure that those technologies are actually delivering before you allow aviation demand to increase beyond where we are now. And as part of that package, I know the Prime Minister ruled out taxes on aviation, but I think there is a space to consider sensible taxes on aviation. So there's a lot of potential in technology, and I absolutely agree with Baroness Vere on that, and really exciting space, but I think we just are also concerned about having that backstop to make sure that aviation isn't just kind of eating up our entire carbon budget as we get nearer 2050.
Great, diving straight into the demand reduction and PM speech in one sentence for us. Some challenges there. Graham, over to you. Thinking about, are there potential new industries that we could take advantage of, particularly in Scotland perhaps?
Well, thanks for inviting me, first of all. Before we get to your question, we'll give you the little preamble, because I've been to a few fringe meetings so far and haven't heard from many people from Scotland. It's all about the picture in England. So we do have quite a strong aviation sector in Scotland. Employs 30,000 people. We have a number of airports that you might have heard of. You might have been to some of them. So Glasgow and Edinburgh are the main ones. Aberdeen as well, and Dundee has a small airport, and we've also got Prestwick, which is government owned, Scottish government owned. So we'll call it Nat Air. They also own the ferries, and they also own the trains. And the ferries and the trains, the ferries definitely don't work. Trains are a little bit better. And they keep telling us they want to sell Prestwick, but any time anyone shows an interest, they suddenly don't. It's a very important sector. I co-convene the cross-party group on aviation in the Scottish Parliament. My other co-convener is an SNP member. He's a former government minister, but he's actually quite sensible. He's in the sort of rebel end of the SNP. So we produced a report on this very topic back in February, and one of our main, our main ask was around SAF and creating a market for SAF. I noticed in the UK government's Jet Zero strategy, they want to see 5 plants in the UK producing SAF. I think it was by 2025. Well, so far there are none, so they've got a lot of catching up to do, and I don't think any of those 5 were in Scotland, and yet we have the massive Grangemouth refinery, which I know Grangemouth are interested because I've spoken to them, that offers a great opportunity to make SAF in Scotland, and we should have it in Scotland because it needs to be made near the market, and we've got two major airports which I mentioned, Edinburgh and Glasgow. So why not create SAF in Scotland for Scottish airports so that we don't lose flights to elsewhere? Now, Baroness Vere, I'm going over my 3 minutes here, but Baroness Vere said the only shows in town are SAF and hydrogen. That is largely true, but we can also look at building planes better. And for instance, Boeing, for instance, are looking. They've got a project with Sheffield University where they're essentially looking at building lighter planes with stronger materials, if I put it that way. And they've also linked up with a company based at Prestwick called Spirit Aerospace, so they'll be involved in this project. So I think it's not fuels are probably the key thing, but also how we make planes, and also the routes. You know, the way planes fly, you can do it more fuel efficient. I've gone over my 3 minutes. I'm very sorry.
That's all right. I'll forgive you, Graham. Again, loads in there, SAF plants and improving aircraft efficiencies. Hopefully we can come back to that in a bit. I'm going to give Richard a few more minutes to catch his breath. So I'll come to you next, Matt. What would you like to hear from government or see? How would you like the kind of developments in the energy bill to be moved forwards?
Good question. What would we like to see from government? I think 3 things: ambition, plus commitment, plus consistency, and I'll say a bit more about those. But just, I mean, taking the question on the panel, is net zero flight ready for takeoff? I think the answer is a resounding yes. And the really exciting thing, actually, in recent years has been to see some of the technologies and solutions we've talked about actually beginning to be developed and implemented. So just a couple of proof points there. Sustainable fuel that the Minister talked about, we know has powered well over 500,000 flights globally and rising. And Virgin this autumn is going to fly the first flight all the way across the Atlantic on 100% SAF. Now, if you'd ask people in the industry 5 or 10 years ago, would that happen? I think the answer would be, wow, that's actually a big challenge. And the fact that it's happening is a really momentous step, actually. Yes, it's one flight, but it shows the solution exists and can be deployed. Hydrogen flight, I mentioned this to colleagues yesterday, but I was at the Cotswold Airport seeing the Zero Avia prototype. I saw a little washing up bowl under the plane with water in it and asked what that was, and that's water dripping out of the exhaust, because the only byproduct from that plane is water, which is astonishing to think you can fly a plane and only emit water because it's powered by hydrogen. Again, one plane, a prototype, but it shows the solutions are beginning to scale up, and we know the route to net zero flight through a combination of the efficiencies that Graham mentioned, sustainable fuel and hydrogen. Bringing it back in specifically to your question, Lynsey, I think there is a huge opportunity for the UK to be really the home of green aviation. In all of the technologies that we've mentioned, we've got a real competitive advantage. The industry is committed and investing, but we need the right market signals from government ultimately to really drive the speed and scale that we need. And just to bring that to life, we talk a lot about what's happening in the US and in the EU on sustainable fuel. But I was looking at the pipeline of planned sustainable aviation fuel, SAF plant openings in the US and Europe. And they begin from this year and they continue year by year. And at the moment in the UK, given the need, as the Minister outlined, for both the mandate but also some kind of revenue certainty mechanism likely to be in law by late 26 on the current time, we won't see construction of those first plants before 2027. So we are at risk of falling behind. So if I just wrap up on my earlier 3 points, ambition, absolutely brilliant from the government. The Jet Zero ambition, transatlantic flight without harm to the environment, 10% SAF. You cannot fault the ambition. Commitment, translating that ambition to action, is absolutely beginning, but is not moving as fast as we need. And consistency, at the moment, the government is sticking the course on this, but it's really important that we do, in order that we harness those huge economic benefits as well as decarbonisation benefits.
Wonderful. Richard, I'm going to come to you next. I think Matt might have stolen some of your thunder a little bit, talking about your patch.
No,
Please do speak into the microphone if that's all right.
yes. I'm going to stand up if you like. I mean, partly because I'm quite small, so you've got a better chance to see me, and partly because it sort of projects some energy. Look, Lynsey, thank you so much, first of all, for SEN hosting this. I think it's a great topic for SEN to move into, because it's going to be the future technology that drives whether we really meet these targets that we've committed to doing. And so when it comes to aviation, look, I come with a bit of sort of declaration of interest in all of this. I used to fly little bulldogs in the Oxford Air Squadron. I was an airline manager for quite a long time, and I spent quite a lot of my time as Prime Minister's trade envoy to Southeast Asia, effectively marketing and selling all sorts of aerospace and aviation solutions. And this country is a world leader. That is the key and starting point. Go back to the first jet engine and Frank Whittle, which hopped along the runway just outside Gloucester in 1926, and leap forward to what Matt rightly referred to as the work on a hydrogen engine at Kemble in the Cotswolds, and the work also on the Spirit of Light, the fastest electric aircraft in the world that's been developed at Staverton by an entrepreneur plus Rolls-Royce. Rather interesting combination. And this is the sort of thing you can and we should expect out of the UK, because we are one of the great world leaders. I remember vividly having a discussion with Airbus about the challenges of Brexit, and pointing out gently that an Airbus without the UK would be without wings, engines and landing gear, and that was a difficult proposition for any aircraft in the world that we know of at the moment. So really important that we play this role in it. Now, when it comes to the whole issue of what we're going to do, I think the business of having match funding in the development of new and zero carbon aircraft technology is a really important commitment from the government. And I think, by the way, it's worth paying a bit of tribute to Grant Shapps, who is a pilot himself and almost as keen on new technology and its powers for transformation as the Prime Minister, made good steps forward on this in both his former roles, both as Transport Secretary and at Net Zero and Energy Security. And I hope very much that continues. So Graham has referred to the importance of sustainable aviation fuels. Matt, I think you referred to the Virgin flight that's coming up. That's all part of a story, it seems to me, where we've seen unmanned helicopters on Mars. We've seen drones as the new weapon of choice in aerial warfare. And we continue to see these commercial commitments. And I think in all of this, the Prime Minister was absolutely right that we are not going to suddenly impose a sort of limit on air travel on individuals. I was very struck in southern Turkey earlier this summer by the fact that out of 34 flights at Dalaman, 31 of them were going to destinations in the UK. Whatever the cost of living crisis is on any individual or family, the one thing that seems to me to remain sacrosanct is that holiday, often abroad, almost always using aircraft. And so that means that we as a nation have to lead on the innovation and technology that makes all this travelling much lower energy and helps us get to our net zero targets. And I think that's probably as much as I should say at the moment. Thanks, Lynsey.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Richard. So I'm going to use Chair's prerogative to throw a question to the Minister and see maybe something else to one of the other speakers. And while I do that, please do get thinking of your questions. We'll have a Q&A. I'm hoping the one at the SEN team will have the roving microphone at some point. But before we do that, I'm going to ask the Minister, a theme that has come up in almost all of the SEN panels is how the UK can compete with the US and the EU, and whether or not we still retain a competitive advantage compared to some of these countries. I'm wondering if sustainable aviation still has a competitive advantage in the UK, and if so, which are the particular areas that we need to be grasping right now?
Well, I think we are doing well in the area of sustainable aviation fuel, for example. We have invested, or are investing, £165 million in match funding for SAF plants. Now, without getting too techie and really dull, there's basically three different types of SAF, different generations, etc. The one that I think that we will be quite good at is second generation SAF, which is the stuff that is made from municipal waste, can be made from sort of organic leftover bits of wood, etc. And the plants, or the pilot plants that I've seen so far, have been very much focused on that technology. And actually, I think that we should drive forward that, because I think that the third generation, which is power to liquid, is still a long way off. So you've got at least one investment cycle of 15 years in second generation. So that's why I'm really keen that we continue to invest alongside some of the big SAF producers to get these spades in the ground. Do I think that we'll get spades in the ground on these SAF plants in 2025? I do. I really do think that is the case, because I do feel that by then the revenue certainty mechanism will be quite far down the track. The demand, the mandate will already be in place, so they will see that the mandate is there. Remember, you'll only need the revenue certainty mechanism if the price of SAF suddenly plummets. That ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen for a long time, because we're just simply not going to have the volume for a long time. So I do think that we will be able to get spades in the ground. It'll depend on planning. Some of these SAF plants need DCOs. That's 18 months of your life that you'll never get back in itself. So we need to get those things moving as quickly as possible. But in general, yes, I do think we are still in the game.
Great. The only other question that I'm gonna throw over is actually to Roz. Something again, another thing that's come up a bit is around HS2 and rail travel more broadly. Is there a role for rail travel in trying to cut emissions from aviation? What does that look like? Should it be something we're talking about more?
Certainly, in terms of domestic travel, I mean, if we're not expanding the number of aircraft slots, then why not use those slots for the places that are harder to reach for connectivity? Those flights that could be easily replaced by rail absolutely makes an awful lot of sense, and ensuring that we have affordable rail travel and consistent rail travel that people can depend on is a huge part of that. The other thing I just mentioned on this front is just a small point about private jets, of which there are 90,000 the UK has a year. The UK has some of the highest levels. That could be a really good place to think about testing out some of these measures that we've all been discussing and policies. And at the moment, the per passenger emissions are about 10 times those of normal flight as well. So if you want the testing around, that seems like a good place to start to us.
Great, and you look like you want to come on up.
Yeah, I might be the only one on the panel who actually has this choice between flying and getting the train, particularly if I'm travelling to London. And if all of you are from England, then frankly you shouldn't be thinking about flying if you're going to London. Only if you're coming up to Scotland. But if you live in Manchester, get the train. I've started to, if I don't go down to London very often. I try to avoid it. But if I do, I've started to get the train recently, because actually the service from Edinburgh. It's 4 hours 20 minutes, so frankly there's not much difference, and it's more comfortable. But if you think, if I was to travel down with my family, then probably the train becomes unaffordable, and that's a big issue for me. Then you could apply that across the country. So train fares do need to become more affordable.
Wonderful. Okay, questions. Gosh, Tara's on mic. We've got a challenge here. Let's start from the front and we'll try and work back. There's a gentleman in the front and the second row. We'll take 3 questions at a time, so I'll then divvy them up between the speakers. Please do remember to say your name and if you're representing an organisation. And I do ask that it's a question, not a comment.
Nick Connor, North West Wales Conservatives. So great to have a fellow devolved person to expand this conversation beyond England. And in North Wales, obviously, we are seeing with the Airbus the future of aviation, and I'm absolutely convinced it's a good direction we're going for, seeing where we are. I just want to take my question back to what Roz was saying earlier about trying to limit air travel. and I think you talked about taxation. I personally think that's very naive, to be quite blunt, because that's going to target a very small, poorer demographic of the air travel. I believe, and I could be wrong, someone could fact check that, we have more airplanes in the sky now than we ever have had before in history, and this is post-pandemic. And air travel is complex. It's logistics. It's not just people going around. But this is an international issue. You know, I don't even know what the UK percentage of air travel is. I imagine it's fairly small in comparison to the global picture. So, what is the global pictures until we move into a period where air travel becomes more sustainable? What do you think the median ground is where we can bring global air travel down?
Wonderful. Gentleman in the second row. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. Andy Jefferson, independent consultant, but here in my role as Programme Director of Sustainable Aviation this morning. So thank you very much for a great panel. One of my questions is, when we did the roadmap in Sustainable Aviation, we obviously, as Matt's described, found that, you know, the plan to deliver net zero is absolutely achievable. You know, we've got detailed evidence up way in which we're going to achieve that. But one of the things we sort of really pulled out was actually there are now some kind of associated sectors that are becoming really important in aviation decarbonisation. One of them is the finance sector, because this stuff's going to cost money, so we need to attract that. The other one is the energy sector, you know, the renewable energy, and then the third one is the carbon removal sector, because that becomes both a feedstock for the sort of third generation sustainable fuels, but also for the residual carbon removal emissions. So the question to the panel is, what do you think we should be doing in addition to attract and join up between the Jet Zero strategy and these wider strategies? Thanks.
Wonderful. I think, Tara, there was someone else in the aisle. I've missed a hand. Oh, there you go.
Right, my name is John Davis, ex-pilot, and a number of questions. I'm also working at the moment with Corytown Fuels and sustainable fuels. Right, number of issues here. I don't think the technology with the aircraft is a problem. I think the really weakest link in it is the fuel supply in terms of volume. So I'd like a comment on this from the panel, how we actually match that, because there is an issue of conflict between land use and demand, I think. Number of other issues come up. Transition, you mentioned Scotland. Well, the number of small flights there, especially to islands, is important. So the big thing I think that comes from that is, as we transit, fuel mix, where you can combine sustainable fuels with an existing aircraft, the issues about that and range, etc. We mentioned other forms of travel. Obviously, we're looking at integration. The integration with the rail is very, very important. But we have this issue about VAT on aviation fuel, yeah? And that relates directly to the cost of rail. And I know you mentioned about cost and the Prime Minister's view with this, but the whole costing of the taxation issue, I think, is very, very important with that. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, loads of questions to dive into there. Okay, I'm gonna start off with going to Richard about the global fairness. How do we make sure that the UK isn't left behind in the global race on Jet Zero? And I wonder if I can expand that a little bit, bearing in mind some of your roles I know you have as trade envoy. Is there a role for aviation in trade and diplomacy? While you're thinking of your answer, I'm also going to go to Graham and Matt for the kind of carbon removal and attracting finance. Ros, I wonder if you'd be interested in VAT on aviation fuel, perhaps. And Minister, I'll let you choose when it comes to you, whichever you fancy. Richard, over to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Lynsey, and probably yes, I'll address sort of some of Andrew's comments first, and then leave some of the more difficult ones to my colleagues on the panel. I mean, look, I think first of all, Lynsey, answer the question about, you know, what's our role in all of this, which Charlotte did touch on. I mean, I think there is no doubt that we are both a major player and perhaps more importantly seen as a major global player by people around the world. And the extent to which we can partner with other countries and other organisations abroad to take some of this agenda forward is going to be really interesting. So, for example, in the Philippines, you've got Cebu Pacific Air. Cebu Air is one of the fastest growing airlines that many people have probably never heard of, and there are others in the region like Lion Air in Indonesia and so on. And all of them have got huge potential for developing their own sustainable aviation fuel. They've got resources from their agriculture that are incredibly precious on this, and they're pushing forward really quite fast. So Cebu Air, for example, has got a big target of sustainable fuel for its network by 2030. I mean, that's pretty soon when you think of the whole of the network. And they've already done that 6 months ago with a Singapore to Manila passenger flight powered by sustainable aviation fuel. So things are happening abroad, and we should, and we are, working very closely with a whole range of partners, not just in the Far East. On the business that I think Andrew raised about how we can use finance and our sort of skills in the City of London and elsewhere, Edinburgh and so on as well, to try and make sure that these things happen. I think the model that we've got at the moment is what I would call a sort of a splattering of funding through different initiatives. So the 15 million Aerospace Technology Institute, I think that is an interesting example. We've got these various catapults in different forms of technology that can focus on how to take things forward. And what this is all really trying to achieve is to lever some seed funding from government to get investment from the financial sector, and then use the technology, the major tech companies, to use their capital as well, which is why Rolls-Royce is a good partner for the Spirit of flight at Staverton on the electric aircraft that will answer one of the questions about Ros mentioned private jets. That's exactly what that is focused on. So that's probably enough for me because you've got lots of people to cover. But I think the great thing is that we should be incredibly optimistic about this. There is sometimes, I find, a spirit of sort of slight gloom in the UK in general about our ability to sort of harness technology and finance and get things done and be leaders. And then on the other hand, sometimes government, forgive me Charlotte, slightly overdoes it by talking about sort of being a global leader in everything. And to some extent we can afford to play down the global leader bit and just get on with doing it and allow everybody else to recognise that we're global leaders, because actually that is how the world sees us. And we just have to try and encourage a bit more positivism amongst our own domestic audiences. Thanks.
Yeah, you're speaking to a British audience here, Richard. Not easy to remain optimistic sometimes. It's in our nature. Graham, I'm going to come over to you to hopefully answer the question around how does the aviation sector work with the energy sector, for example, and what role could carbon capture and storage have in the Jet Zero transition?
Blimey. I'm actually going to rattle through all the questions. I'll give you short answers though, and I have to tell Richard that I'm not gloomy. I don't think anyone in the room is gloomy. They're all smiling. So to answer your direct question, then I'll move on to the others. In the report that I mentioned that we produced, our cross-party group, we said that there was challenges for the UK government, mainly the UK government, but also for the Scottish government. And I think they have a role because they set up the Scottish National Investment Bank. Everything's nationalised in Scotland. But that is meant to invest in sort of industries with potential. And our suggestion was that we could use the Scottish National Investment Bank to help to create that SAF industry in Scotland. Now, so far, it took us 7 months to get a response from the UK government. We haven't had a response yet from the Scottish government. At least we had a UK government response. And I'm hoping that Charlotte will come and actually attend one of our meetings. That would be good. So I think there's an opportunity there in Scotland. In terms of energy, carbon capture, I think probably, again, government needs to start talking to people like Grangemouth that I meant, INEOS who run Grangemouth would be very, very keen to speak to government. I don't understand the science, but when I was speaking to them yesterday, they're going to be involved in the carbon capture scheme in Scotland. And they were telling me, though I don't understand how it works, that there is an opportunity there to create SAF using hydrogen and some of the carbon that they get. So there's opportunities there, but you need to talk to the actual refineries, I think. So that and then going. Yes, Nick from Wales, your speech was not so much a question, more of a speech. I'm actually not in favour of cutting air travel. I'm a very big fan of air travel. I hosted an event in the Scottish Parliament where it was a phrase called flight shaming came up. I'd never heard of it, and I just told the audience I'm not ashamed to fly. I love flying, and I don't want to cut it. We just need to do it better. John, the ex-pilot, you mentioned the Scottish Islands. I should have mentioned that earlier because there are a lot of, I think there's a real opportunity there, John, in these short flights to use battery technology and hydrogen, and some of that's going on at the moment. There are some trials, but that's where you would test this out on these short flights.
Great. Matt, I'm going to come to you next. Again, I wonder if you could kind of touch on the attracting finance. Bear in mind it was a question from Sustainable Aviation. But also perhaps on the kind of feedstocks, which we haven't quite touched on yet. How do you think we overcome the lack of feedstocks that we're inevitably going to get to based on the need for feedstocks in not just aviation, but any number of sectors?
Both good questions, and I didn't ask Andy to plant that question at a Sustainable Aviation sponsored event. I mean, on just 3 quick thoughts on investment, what the industry is doing, the role of government. I mean, the whole focus really of the discussion on SAF is how do we get investors over the line of final investment decisions to build plants. And I think the Minister outlined well the combination of a mandate sending a strong demand signal, but every investor I've talked to and fuel producer has said they need something more by way of revenue certainty. Brilliant the government has moved from whether to how on that, and we now need to move rapidly to look at what are the creative mechanisms that will get investors over the line with those final investment decisions. Lifting it up a level, interesting, what I see talking to other sectors, hydrogen, carbon capture we mentioned, actually it's a pretty similar kind of menu of policy tools that are needed there, a combination of stick, if you like, in terms of mandate type measures, but incentives, contract for difference, I know is being looked at in terms of hydrogen, for example. So there's an important role for government. There's also an important role for the industry here. So we are, just taking the example of carbon capture that Andy mentioned specifically, we're exploring as the aviation sector, sending what we're calling an advanced market signal. So effectively a signal that we know that carbon removal is going to be part of the solution, that we would invest in that at a future point at the right price under the right conditions in order to help build investor certainty. So I don't want the Minister to think we're saying that we're not just saying, we're committed, we're doing some things, but really it's all on government. We're exploring the kind of measures we can take as well, but it does need to be, partnership is a much overused word, but it does need to be a partnership. Just quickly on feedstock, I actually think the feedstock challenge is less than some of the debate assumes. So just to tackle one of the points, we're not looking at food to fuel in the UK at all. It's all about waste. So the land use competition issue is not an issue in the UK, point one. If you look at a global level, I haven't found any better work than that done by Adair Turner, probably the most, one of the brightest people I've ever met, and his Energy Transitions Commission. They've looked at global feedstock supply, and they've concluded there is sufficient, even forgetting power to liquids, there's sufficient sustainable biomass to power all of aviation's needs and other needs as well. Now, it does need to be prioritised, so you do need to say, well, biofuel may not be the best option or sustainable fuel for road transport where there are other alternatives. So it's not to say there are no choices, but it is to say there's sufficient. And of course, as the Minister said, the goal past second generation is a fully synthetic fuel where the ingredients basically are air and water. You're taking, capturing carbon from the air, you're combining it with renewably produced hydrogen for a fully carbon neutral fuel. Now, as we've said, that's a bit of a way off, but it's the same menu of policies that will get us to power to liquid as well.
Ros, I wonder, do you agree on the feedstocks issue? And there was a question on VAT as well.
I think we're not. We do have a few. Wow. We have a few more concerns about the feedstocks, and I think it needs to be really carefully managed. And I think this is where the policy link up between different policy areas. So, the biomass strategy that came out recently started to come up with a hierarchy, but then basically kind of switched to talking about biomass mainly being used for BECCS. And I think more of a consideration of kind of those difficult choices. I actually work quite a lot on industrial decarb. We've been looking at the chemical sector. They are looking at exactly the same feedstocks as the aviation sector, and I'm worried that people aren't talking to each other. So, if we have to choose between making aviation fuel and making plastics, for instance, who is going to be deciding? Is it going to be a sensible, rational choice is the best place to put that biomass? Likewise, a little bit concerned about people talking about using municipal waste, fine as an intermediary technology perhaps, but in the end we don't want to be producing that waste. We want to be getting rid of waste from the system. It's much more efficient up front, carbon-wise, to not be producing that waste rather than making it and then burning it in airplanes effectively. So I think there is opportunity in that space, but we just need to be really careful. And there are studies showing that there is the availability, but there are also studies such as the one from the Royal Society recently showing that we need to be, there is no easy wins in this area.
I'm I'm going to rise almost to the mention of the Royal Society piece on aviation. No, the point I was going to make is, so it's a transition. I think it's really important to remember that it's not a black and white. Everything is suddenly perfect. It's going to be a bit messy along the way, but the goal is that we are defossilizing over time. So yes, municipal waste, I don't think anyone is saying is the end state. Yes, we don't want waste, but we have waste now. It's better than digging fossil fuel out of the ground and burning it. So let's go there before we go to power.
It's absolutely just how you don't create lock-in. I think that's our concern, is that you create a market for that waste and then you don't have a way to remove that waste. And I think it's thinking through the kind of longer-term transition and not getting stuck.
Yeah. Graham, did you have a quick comment before I ask the Minister the final answer these questions?
So it was just on the waste issue. I mean, I agree that we should be using waste rather than using crops. But we asked the Scottish Government whether they'd done any analysis of how much waste will be available in order to make SAF, and they've done no analysis whatsoever. So it seems to me there's a challenge for the UK government. Charlotte may be able to answer that question. Have there been any talks with people who handle the waste about how much could be available to produce SAF? Because if we want to produce it in quite a short space of time, we need to know where the waste is coming from and how much we have.
Well, a direct question there for you, Minister. But I wonder if you want to wrap up anything from the rest of the questions we had there.
I think look, there are conversations going on around waste and how we're going to prioritise it, etc. But one of the things that I sometimes get frustrated in all of these conversations around decarbonisation is the extent to which the role of this sort of managing various feedstocks, etc., falls on government. It's very difficult for government to take on that role. Of course, we can do strategic work, but at the end of the day, it is going to be up to the people who are the customers and the consumers of any particular element, and that might be waste. That might be sustainable aviation fuel. I'd like to see much more work being done by the people who are actually going to use it, the airlines, in terms of creating longer-term signals about the amount that they will be taking. So I do think that sometimes we've got to just sort of have that balance right between what government does and what the government can do and what the market should be doing, because we can set the overarching framework, but within that we need the market to sort out many of these issues. So I get to choose some of the other things. There's loads and loads of questions, which is brilliant. So I want to just also briefly talk about the international work that we do. And I completely agree, Richard. I get really cross with my officials when they write me a submission that says, we are the world leading X. No, we're not. Just put we are doing X. Other people will decide if it's world leading or not, because it's not up for us to say. It's when they use it innovative as well. It'd be an innovative solution. It's a solution. Other people will decide if it's innovative or not. Anyway, it really annoys me. But what we've got to understand is aviation is inherently international. And what we do not want to do is put anything in place within the UK that will damage our UK system and actually offshore some of the carbon emissions. Because there will be lots of people who will transit through the UK, and obviously there's competition from other hub airports in Europe. So I'm very, very keen that we don't end up with a very high-cost UK aviation sector versus a lower-cost European aviation sector, because I think that would be very bad. Which is why everything that we've been doing internationally has been really important. And I can say with confidence, actually, that we are one of the leading nations when it comes to the discussions that happened at ICAO in setting the net zero by 2050 target. We are also one of the nations who is ensuring that the Corsia intervention is strengthened. Everyone will know that it is the Conference of Alternative Aviation Fuels later on this year in November in the UAE. And again, we will be working with other nations. We have a group of nations actually called IACAC, which I can't remember what it stands for, but anyway, it's about 26 of them. And we will be looking at how we can put in place some sort of SAF. It may not be a firm mandate, but there will be some sort of demand element coming through. The other thing I wanted to pick up on was SAF blending, etc. So the government has not set up as such, but we have supported University of Sheffield to be the SAF clearinghouse. So that clearinghouse will be responsible for testing all of the different SAF types that come through the different pathways. They will do the testing. It'll be up to, then they'll also look at the amounts that things can be blended, such that they become proper drop-in fuels. And therefore, we won't have that anxiety that we're putting some rubbish in the fuel storage at airports. And there will be an announcement soon around some support from government as to how we're going to make sure that the SAF producers can get their SAF products through the clearinghouse as quickly as possible, because that can be quite a backlog sometimes.
Okay. So one final comment from Richard, and then we'll come to some more questions. Just testament to how brilliant those last questions were, and hopefully we'll have more. Richard, one final comment on these.
Yeah, it was just a very quick comment because it's interesting. The Minister referred to that conference that's coming up in the Middle East. It's just worth remembering that our reach, it does go a bit further than just thinking about the UK, because when I was talking about Cebu Air earlier, what I didn't mention is that their CEO is British. And if you look at the Middle Eastern carriers, you'll find that by and large that is exactly the same thing, and there is more than just one bloke as CEO. So the British footprint around the world, because we're quite good at exporting talent as well as projects and technology, is considerable. And all of these airlines will be watching and looking online at what we're doing and tapping into that. So we are, without having to boast about it, always influencing other airlines, other carriers, other regulators and other countries. And that is helpful, because it does mean that we will avoid everybody hopefully sort of going off in different directions. And therefore I think it is right to think of this as a sector where we can help shape things in the right way to achieve these ambitious and important developments.
Absolutely. We're going to head to the back, Tara, because we did front last time. Go to there's one there at the back in the aisle, and then if we come a few rows forward. Go for it.
Thank you. My name's Sam Trask. I'm a councillor from South Wales, but in my day job I've been an aircraft engineer for the last 25 years. I'm not representing them, but I do work for GE Aerospace. And one of the things that we're developing, something that hasn't been mentioned by the panel so far, is hybrid electric propulsion. It's something that's going to be particularly important for Richard, for your patch, because we have Doughty propellers there, and they will be manufacturing the propellers for these. So can I invite the panel to make some comments, please, on how they feel that hybrid electric propulsion is going to fit in with the global aerospace framework for Jet Zero?
Great. Tara, there's a lady just a few rows in front.
Hi, I'm Sue Clark. I'm a non-executive director on the board of EasyJet, and we're obviously very committed to the hydrogen alternative. We think it's the right thing for short-haul flights. My question, though, is for the Minister. I mean, the thing that we could do that would actually reduce fuel consumption without any technology investment is to actually have one air traffic control system across Europe and not have dog legs through every single country. That means we don't have the most efficient routes across Europe when we fly. And if you compare that with America, it's a massive difference. Now, I know that's hard. I know we can't even run our own air traffic control system particularly well. I can see a frown there, but we've got 130 cancellations in Gatwick at the moment because of the air traffic control system. But by the by, is there any way we could get a more joined up system across Europe?
Great, and there's one more hand. Nope, there you go, wonderful.
Thank you and good morning. I'm Gina Bloomfield, District Councillor in the Cotswolds, so I'm absolutely delighted about Zero Avia and its hydrogen, developing hydrogen planes. But my question is, a lot of people on flights now are encouraged to buy zero carbon emissions, you know, and they have been invested into forests around the thing. I heard at the NFU last night that New Zealand is sort of due to be covered in forests as a result of that, and all the sheep are going. I think that may be an exaggeration, but it also was reflected in this country in some of the uplands. So I don't know whether that's a good way of getting your carbon emissions down. I think these people ought to be encouraged to invest maybe in SAF, maybe in something else, but not covering the place with trees, which is going to reduce the amount of land available for food production. So my question is, could we look at a different way of doing that? Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to come to the Minister first around the air traffic control and efficient routes, and then Ros about offsetting, Graham on manufacturing, and perhaps Richard on hybrid electric propulsion, and then Matt, I'll let you sweep up at the end. So, Minister.
Excellent. My favourite topic. Airspace and air traffic control, both very dear to my heart. And actually, we haven't really properly talked about airspace so far, so it's a very important topic. Will we get a joined-up system in Europe? No. Of course not, because it's sovereignty. It is all each country runs its own airspace. Now you have Eurocontrol, which does do some things. It does sort of forward on things like flight plans for the whole of Europe, including the UK. But it will still always be the case that a sovereign nation will want to be able to control its own airspace, because might need it for military purposes, etc. So you wouldn't want to give that up just at this moment in time. However, there is an enormous amount we can do in terms of airspace modernisation. We are working very hard at it at the moment. It is insanely complicated. I cannot remember how many airports and aerodromes we have in the London area. I think it's about 13 or something. So what we're going to try and do is centralise it a bit more in terms of the design of the airspace. Sometimes nowadays we have some routes that haven't changed for decades and decades, and they're mad. And so, some of the routes you could probably reduce fuel burn by about 10 to 20%. And I think that is fairly low-hanging fruit, although it's very complicated. But we are working very, very hard on that. In terms of air traffic control, obviously this has taken up a little bit of my life recently, and there are two issues here. There is the overarching top-level, high-level airspace, where we had the issue on the end of August. That was a one-off, but of course the CAA are going to review that, and we're going to have a very comprehensive report, so I'm not too worried about that one, because we will get to the bottom of it and they will come up with recommendations. In terms of Gatwick air traffic control, look, we've known it's been a problem for a long time. Luton's got the same issue. It takes a long time to train an air traffic controller. It takes well over 18 months. Now, of course, NATS only took over the Gatwick Tower in October 2022, so they actually haven't had time to get more air traffic controllers through the system. So it will get better, I absolutely promise you that, and Martin Rolfe, the CEO, is all over it. But it is, something that worries me, and it is up to the airport, the airlines and air traffic control to try and work together just to get through this period.
Great. Ros, over to you next on whether or not offsetting is the right solution for this, and how can we make sure that offsets that we do use are robust?
So offsetting is definitely not the only thing we need to be doing. There is a place for well-designed offsets, but most of what we see on the market is really poor. And actually, just to reassure what is a well-designed offset, I mean, tree planting isn't a bad thing to be doing. That portion of upland produces a tiny percentage of the UK's food, actually. So I think the argument about food and upland is not a strong one. We could be using some of that land for tree planting. Well managed with farmers. Don't shake your head at me. But I think we need to be very careful about how we also build a framework for land use in the UK and make sure that we're putting those trees in the right places, certainly. And I think we also need to think about actually who has the access to that tree planting, because if we use it all now and all that capacity the UK has for tree planting and absorbing carbon that way to offset aviation emissions, what happens about farming and other sectors when they have to get to net zero later in our transition? So should be really wary on that. I just had the point, if it's okay, quickly about equity as well. And at the moment, aviation, half the population doesn't fly regularly. and you pay far more tax to drive somewhere. Households pay considerably more. So I think there is space for aviation taxation at the moment to get us closer to what the UK says the government thinks we should be paying per tonne of carbon. And I think we should be thinking about clever mechanisms like the frequent flyer levy that mean that your first few flights don't necessarily get taxed. So just on the equity point, and that would also raise revenues then for the kind of innovation that we talked about. And in terms of Europe as well, Europe is looking at things like kerosene taxes. So I don't think we need to be too concerned about becoming kind of losing traffic on that front.
Great. We are rapidly running out of time, so I'll ask that these answers are a little bit brief, and then we'll try and get in a final sentence from each of you before we close. Graham, I wondered if you could pick up the point about manufacturing and how much of a role aviation could have in spurring some manufacturing in our industrial heartlands.
Well, I didn't actually hear that question. I heard a question about hybrid electric.
Go for that one then.
Right.
Go with that.
So I'll go with that. So I think there's a huge potential for that, and I think I touched on that earlier. You know, when I was talking about the Scottish Islands. You know, I think for these short trips we need to be, you know, looking at these different technologies, and it is happening. I mean, Loganair. So Loganair, I don't know if you've heard of Loganair, but they're a Scottish airline. And they fly to the islands, you know, and they are experimenting in electric, and I think they're doing hydrogen as well. So I think the answer to that is yes. The short answer is yes, and if I could just very short answer on carbon offsetting, I think it's a bit of a con, but people, you know, it's just used by companies to. You know, it's an excuse not to do anything. So they ought to just get their own houses in order.
Richard, what do you think about hybrid electric propulsion?
Yeah, thanks. No, very quick comments. I mean, first of all, wonderful to hear from Gina about your support for net zero Viva. I mean, there's no councillor in the country who's more on the case with her patch. So wonderful to hear that point. On the point about hydroelectric propulsion. And the gentleman working with GE Aviation, again, that's another sort of hidden jewel that many people in the UK don't know about, the work that you do on aviation instruments at Bishop's Cleeve, and the propellers that still have the brand of Doughty propellers, still have the designs for the Spitfire propellers in their reception and all the rest. It's a fantastic example of ancient and modern together. I think the market for turboprops is underappreciated, actually. I think they have a bright future, and I hope very much that Doughty propellers will be part of that. On the business of NATS and EasyJet, well covered by Charlotte, I think the point I would make is I took President Marcos in the Philippines around Gatwick Airport a couple of months ago, and the object of that exercise was that Gatwick Airport is the most efficient single runway airport in the world, something not many people in this country know of. And that's why he was coming to look at how it operated, how it's managed, how they use the space. And of course, NATS is a key part of it. NATS is also an organisation which has fine-tuned the flights of carriers around the world, saving shed loads of money for the carriers, but also reducing, of course, the carbon emissions involved. So that they are a crucial part of our national infrastructure, and I'm as optimistic as the Minister that the short-term problems that facing, which are obviously affecting you, which is very frustrating, will be resolved soon. But they are an important national asset, and the fact that we can market Gatwick Airport to other nations, and that's what Manila Airport will one day look like, I think is really encouraging. So I think that's enough from me. Thanks.
Wonderful. Matt, over to you.
I'll be super brief. 75% of the aviation journey to net zero is in sector. It is efficiency, as we've talked about. It is sustainable fuel. It's hydrogen. The other 25% is slightly lower demand growth because there's a green premium for some of these technologies. We've been open about that, the government has, and it's high quality carbon removal, so it needs to address all the issues that you flag. I'm going to close with a plug for peatland. Some of you will have heard me do this before. 12% of the UK's land area is peatland. 80% of it's degraded. It emits as much carbon as all of the flights from Heathrow each year. It's relatively quick and cost effective to stop the peatland drying out, which is what causes it to emit carbon. So we need to focus on that as well as part of high quality carbon removal.
That's actually a wonderfully optimistic place to pause. So I will leave it there. In half an hour, we have the next SEN panel, which is burning wood for electricity a waste of taxpayers' money or a climate solution? So stick around. We also have our stand in the exhibition hall, which is about cut taxes, insulate homes, and lower bills. So please do go take a look, grab a tote bag or a notebook. And thank you very much to our wonderful speakers, to Graham, to Ros, to Richard, to Baroness Vere, and Matt, and Sustainable Aviation for supporting us. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions. Please give out applause.